Hey movie fans, so I just saw Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning. Now, I am a big Mission Impossible fan. I recently did my ranking of the first 7 movies in this franchise just to get myself and you guys hyped up for this final film in this Mission Impossible franchise. Supposedly final movie, but you know, when is final ever final in a movie series? If this is the final Mission Impossible, is it a good movie to send this franchise out on? Does it kind of fall flat on its face? Where does this land on the Mission Impossible franchise? We've got some great stuff and then we've got some not as great stuff. Where does this fall? I gotta be honest, I was reading a lot of negative comments going into this movie that there's this, that, and the other thing, so I kind of was like, God, wow, I don't know how to feel about this. That kind of seems not in keeping with the franchise, which has been on a pretty steady and consistent stream of good movies since 4 onward. Some would even argue 3 onward. But then I saw this movie, and I absolutely loved it. I know some people are being very, very critical about this movie, but as a Mission Impossible fan, this is absolutely a little bit of a messy story, and there's some trimming and some refining with the plot that I think could have smoothened it out a little bit more. But if this is to be the final Tom Cruise Mission Impossible movie, I am happy with where we leave the franchise and where it kind of ends. So let's break it all down, because while I enjoyed this movie quite a bit, it's not perfect. I wouldn't even say it's the best Mission Impossible movie by any stretch, but it belongs in the good half of the franchise more so than it does in the not as good half, if that makes sense. So let's kick us off with some of the positives. Naturally, when you're talking about Mission Impossible, you gotta talk about the man, the myth, the legend, Tom Cruise himself, and he is once again fantastic in this movie. He's kind of playing his greatest hits as Ethan Hunt. There's a lot of stuff that we've seen in other Mission Impossible movies for this one, but I like the hits for a reason. And also, a lot of the times in Mission Impossible movies, it's Ethan, but it's an ensemble. A lot of this movie is pretty much Ethan-centric, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's Tom Cruise-centric, but that's kind of what this franchise has always been about, both on screen and off. So if this is his swan song, I totally get why he gets more screen time than most Mission Impossible movies. It's about him, after all. There's still a group dynamic, but this is an Ethan Hunt story, and he's really, really good in this. He's a great protagonist, and it's very easy to get behind him, especially, you know, when the world is collapsing around him and he's the one guy that you trust to save the day because he somehow manages to work the miracles. The other thing besides Tom Cruise when it comes to Mission Impossible that we always have to talk about is the big stunts. Now, there's 2 in particular here. There's an aerial stunt that you've been seeing a lot in the trailers and marketing, and one water stunt that they're not showing as much. I was actually more impressed with the water stunt, and that one had me on the edge of my seat holding my breath even more so. But both were outstanding. They felt like callbacks to previous Mission Impossible movies, but that's an intentional choice. There's a lot of callbacks and Easter eggs and references to previous Mission Impossible movies. I've seen a lot of people say that as a negative going into it, but as a fan of the franchise, I felt rewarded for it. I felt like the references that are there, for the most part, were really, really cool. There are a lot of flashbacks to older movies, and I maintain that was a good thing, because with this franchise going on for almost 30 years now, you don't know where someone really came into this franchise. Case in point, I came in at the 4th one, and then I watched the first 3 later. But having these flashback scenes, while continuous and they got annoying at times, I still deemed them necessary, because it's like the old adage in comics. Any comic could be someone's first comic. You don't know where someone came in the Mission Impossible franchise, and if they don't know certain things, it's not a bad thing to just fill them in really quickly with a flashback. That being said, there's a lot of it, so I get why some people didn't necessarily love it, but for me personally, I actually kind of enjoyed a lot of the Easter eggs and references for the most part, but we'll circle back to that in a little bit here. One of my big criticisms about the last Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning, is that was originally intended to be a part 1 of 2, this being the second half here, and that movie felt a lot like a lot of setup for this final movie, and we got a lot more setup here, really putting the pieces on the chessboard for the back half. But when we get to that back half, it is so thrilling and exciting and engaging. You're on the edge of your seat. It is a grand spectacle of a second half of a movie. I didn't necessarily even mind the first half. There's some interesting intrigue and espionage going on. Plus, I like Ethan's team. I've always been just as invested in the team and the characters as much as the big stunt in every movie. So having spent more time with the characters, I felt that was really fun and rewarding, but that could just be me. But that back half, oh baby, we're going 100 miles an hour and it is fantastic. It's so much fun. It's a lot of energy and excitement. And oh boy, that final action piece in particular going, wow, Tom Cruise, you are nuts. And what a big epic piece to go out on if this is your last big stunt in this franchise. Now, lastly, for my positives, because it's both a positive and a negative, is this movie really tries to weave in all the other movies into one big cohesive storyline, kind of like Daniel Craig's James Bond for No Time to Die. That movie tried to say, oh yeah, there's all these pieces that you didn't know were connected, and now they are. I thought that was cool at times, and other times, it really does not work. Again, I'm not going to give you the full spoilers of what those are, but delving into the negative side of things, there's some retcons and references because they're trying to patch everything together, be like, oh yeah, the first was important, the third one was important, the sixth one, all these movies are important. We've been telling one big story, and some things work, other things and other retcons that they decide to implement, not so much. There's one character that we meet for the first time in the last movie that there's a big retcon reveal about them later that on paper should be a big deal, but the movie doesn't really treat it as a big deal after that big revelation. I was in the theater going, oh wow, that's a big game changer. Like, holy crap, that's a huge reveal for your final movie. And then they didn't really do anything with it. It was a weird way to tie back into the first movie, but not necessarily smoothly. Like it was a reveal that didn't need to happen in the grand scheme of things. But there's other elements that they try and be like, oh, well, this thing from this previous movie was also important for this movie. I'm like, was it though? Or are you just trying to make it all connect when it doesn't really have to? That was kind of the appeal of the first half of the Mission Impossible movies, is they didn't connect their standalone, but now they're all one big arc, and that's, take it or leave it. I don't necessarily mind it, but at times it was a little bit clunky. I also mentioned we got a lot of flashbacks in this one to previous movies to, again, fulfill that arc. And I don't necessarily mind it, but some of the editing with the flashbacks were really, really wonky and weird. Like, talking about something, you immediately cut to it and then cut right back to the action. It was weirdly chopped up. Like, I think there was a smoother and better way to do it. Don't ask me what that would be. I'm not a professional. I don't know. I'm just some dude. But I think there's a smoother way to go about doing said flashbacks. And again, without diving too much into spoilers, the fate of certain characters throughout this movie, I wasn't a huge fan of. I'm fine where some people's stories ended, and not a fan of where other people's stories ended. Again, I'm trying to be vague here. One character in particular, I felt like they got done dirty, and it didn't really work. It was more or less a motivating thing, and I didn't really love it in the story. I'm like, that character deserves a lot better of an ending to their story. Come on now. I also could have done a little bit more of a team dynamic. Like I said, Ethan is by himself trying to save the day for a lot of this, and I've always liked the team dynamic. That's why Ghost Protocol is my favorite Mission Impossible. We still got some of it, but the team is kind of doing its own side mission without Ethan for a good chunk of this movie, and I think I could have used a little bit more of them all together, if that makes sense. But overall, I really, really enjoyed this one, apparently more than a lot of people. I just love this franchise, so I wanted a good swan song for it to go out on if this is the final Mission Impossible movie. Is it the best? Absolutely not. I still had a lot of fun with it. It is a long movie, but it did not feel necessarily long to me. I actually really enjoyed most of the pacing here. It was a brisk 2 hours and 50 minutes. It's long, but I really, really enjoyed it. Tom Cruise has been giving it his all to this franchise for almost 30 years now, and I really just love this franchise so much. I'm gonna miss it when it's gone for the few years until someone eventually reboots it, but I just really, really enjoy the final reckoning. I thought this was a good way to send off the characters for the most part. And I'm really happy that we've got this franchise, and now it's going to be weird to not have a Mission Impossible movie on the horizon for a little bit. But what do you guys think? Are you fans of Mission Impossible? Have you seen The Final Reckoning? Are you going to? What are your thoughts on Mission Impossible as a whole? Whatever your thoughts, let me know down in the comments below, as I care from you guys. And as always, if you like what you see and want to see more, subscribe to the channel. And as always, stay sharp, movie guys and gals.